Hello, guys. This is Marco back again with another edition of the INFJ musician. That's a Libra and stuff. I think that's the name of the show. And today's episode is going to be about race, police violence, and just all that. There's a lot of that going on today in America. I mean, it's always been going on. It's never really changed. But it's a recurring thing and it keeps on happening. So I want to sort of talk about that and how it's impacted my life, um, since I was a child or since I was black, which has been forever. So as I've said in like the intro thing of this, the first time I grew up in Marietta, Georgia, in East Cobb. It's a very like predominantly white area. Um, until I got into like higher grades, I was always like one of maybe two or three black kids in like the entire grade. Um, and that in itself was, a strange thing, but I never really thought about it that much until in kindergarten. I never really thought about race like in preschool or mostly when I was just at home because obviously I wasn't um when I was just at home, I was just with my parents, and they were diverse and multicultural. And I didn't. It's funny because my dad's Spanish and or not Spanish, he's Costa Rican slash Panamanian, and he looks like he has straight hair and all that. He still looks very ethnic, right? And then my mom, she is Nigerian, a dark skinned black woman, and I never really thought about you know uh the dynamic. And then my grandma, she lived with me as well, and she's a very fair skinned Spanish woman. She dyed her hair blonde her whole life, or at least the part of the life when I was alive. And So I never really had a concrete perception of what race meant until I got a little older. But the first time, like I said in the other episode, that I ever was confronted with race is when I was in kindergarten. And a girl, we were in the sandbox or something, and a girl was like, she asked me, "Are you dark because you got burned by the sun?" And that sort of made me like think about it, like, right? That sort of made me think like, wow, I'm different than these kids, right? Um, I don't really fit in here, right? And I think that would go on to create a this dichotomy that my life would go on to forever sort of fit into, right? Uh, just that struggle of not having anyone, especially in school. So, you would gravitate towards the black kids, and you would, my best friend was Frankie for a long time. I think that was from second grade until he moved, in maybe fifth grade, and I think that there's a lot of identity issues that go on with first like black kids that grow up around white kids, right? Because you don't because like I said, people talk certain ways, right? Like you can be a white kid and you can sound urban, or you could be a black kid and people be like, "Oh, you sound white." But all that is you're just a product of your environment, right? You're a product of the people you're around. You're a product of the people that you talk to on a daily basis, and that you're trying to, be cordial with, right? So you're gonna do your best to try to relate to them in their language, right, or in the way they speak. So a lot of black kids who grow up around white people, there's a big identity crunch, for lack of a better word, where they almost are whiter than the white kids, right? Where they'll be like dude and all that kind of stuff. Spelled dude. I don't know if people still say that now, but when I was growing up, that was like the white word. Like dude. You say dude before everything. And I remember there was like even a grade, maybe fourth grade, fifth grade, when I was doing that too. Just because you want to fit in, right? All the cool kids are like the white kids and all that. Um, I'm jumping ahead of myself though. But so when I was young, uh, I remember there were certain things that after that moment, it was always like ingrained in my head that, I was different from these kids. And with a majority of them being white, that was a negative thing, right? As you get older, you can embrace differences for being good things. But at that point, it wasn't to me, right? So I would notice things on the bus, like, oh, like the window would be down and the kid's hair would be blowing. And I'd be like, damn, my hair doesn't blow in the wind. Or be like, oh, my nose is bigger than their noses. Or, oh, my lips are, bigger than theirs. And I do that like this and be like, look at myself in the mirror, like, oh, how would I look if I had like lips like the other kids, like the cooler kids? Uh, and just face it, and it's complex and it sounds silly, right? But as a little kid, these are the kind of things that would go through my head just because I was alone. I had no it was a rarity, right? Until like maybe like second grade. I remember Desmond was a kid. And it was funny, anytime a black kid would come, it would be quick, we'd be quick friends, right? We'd like, set up play dates and all that kind of stuff. Um, just because I was so isolated, right? Like I'd be friendly with people in school and we do like birthday functions and stuff like that. And don't get me wrong, I had like a good amount of maybe like, five, five, a good amount of white kids that were like good friends of mine. But I think that always added to my isolation and how even today I'm an introvert and I enjoy isolation. I don't necessarily get stimulation out of being around a lot of people. And I think that's because of that, because not only was it in the suburbs with all these damn trees, but then there's all these white people, and I just didn't feel like I belonged, in those groups. So anyway, uh, that happened. And then eventually there came a point where like maybe fourth or fifth grade where I started like relaxing my hair. Um I don't remember the exact reason. I know it was like a prodding by my mother, right? And so I started doing that, and then my hair would be like flat and I'd gel it. So I ended up looking more like a Spanish kid than a white kid, but I thought, okay, well, I look cool because my hair is straight now. And I remember Frankie, Frankie one time, it was right before he had moved. It was probably like fifth grade or fourth grade or something like that. I don't remember if I moved or I think Frankie moved because he was having like some kind of go away party. That was pretty, I wasn't really sad. I never get sad about when people leave, right? Not to say that I'm like cold or anything or that I don't care. It's just that I think I always feel like nothing's like that final, right? Until someone dies, and then you can get sad. But anyway, and he was like, why are you doing your hair like that? Like that's so weird. And I was like, oh, because I freaking want to do my hair like that, and it's cool. I think it's cool. And I was like, I can comb it. Like I had a comb, and I was like combing. It's like I could never comb my hair with this kind of comb before I did the pressing thing, or not the pressing, the relaxer thing that would burn your scalp. The relaxers are terrible, by the way. You like put that in your hair and you just let it sit, and then it just burns, and you'll have big chunks and scabs in your head. That will be bloody and it'll itch, and it's torture. I don't know why my mom would ever recommend such a thing, but she did. So I can't necessarily remember when I started doing that. It had to be like fourth grade. I remember when I went through my fat phase in fourth grade. Um, that's when it really started. That's the first picture I can recall in my head where I had my hair looking like that. But at the end of the day, I never, despite doing those things, it never got me more friends. It never, the people who were my friends would always just be, the cooler kids. You know what I mean? But still, me being alone was a lot more prevalent than me hanging out with people, because there were just always so many white people. Uh, and I think growing up, that's probably not the norm, right? I think more people tend to hang out with others, right, than just be by themselves. Well, anyway, Frankie was like, "Why'd you get your hair like that?" And I was just like, it was these things as a kid that you sort of like, you're facing the race issue head on, right? but you don't really know it. And it's like you get all these feelings inside, and yeah, and it's just like a lot of uncertainty and discomfort. So anyway, um, eventually I left Marietta and I went to Alpharetta, which was actually even whiter than than Marietta. So, but at this point, that's when my father had gone to prison, right? Or jail. I don't know what's the difference. I think prison's more serious. He went to jail. Um, and then that's when I started embracing, you know, the black part of me. And I always, I've always embraced being black, right? Because all my cousins and stuff were always black, and all my family and everything is always black. Um, let me put this in there. Even I remember one time in second grade. So my grandma was like fair skinned Spanish woman, right? And I remember that because my parents could have come to like a teacher conference thing or something like that, that my grandma came, and I was so embarrassed that because, and it's funny, right? Because I was embarrassed because she was not the same color as me, and I thought that people would think that we weren't, like related, or people would look at us funny. And I remember I treated her so coldly, and I remember that after the event, we got home. I remember she was crying, right? So this was me. I'm like a 6-year, 7-year-old kid, right? And I made my grandma cry. Um, because I guess she felt like I didn't accept her. So I went and I apologized to her, and I think that sort of opened my eyes even more at that age to just what race meant and what differences meant, and me thinking it's so important what other people think. You know what I mean? And of course that would go on and on, but I think that incident and seeing how much it hurt my grandma really chipped away a little bit at that, right? So by the time I got to Alpharetta, it was so unapologetically white there, and a different kind of white, right? Because these kids were rich. Whereas in Marietta, it was like, okay, there was a certain group of kids that were rich. Um, but in Alpharetta, it seemed like everybody was rich. So I went the opposite direction, and I started embracing hip hop, started dressing, quote unquote, more black, started listening to more hip hop music and doing all that. Even though my first year in Alfred, I was just still a normal kid. I remember when I first got to the school, everybody thought I was weird because I had gelled hair and I would dress like, like a punk rock kid or something like that. I remember this one chick named Angela came up to me and asked me, she's like, "Are you gay?" I'm like, "What the fuck? What do you mean am I gay?" It's like, "No." And that didn't, I mean, so that whole first year I just went being just weird, right? People just thought I was this weird kid. Like, who the hell is this black kid who thinks he's white, or this black kid who isn't like other black kids? I don't know what they thought about me. But so seventh grade, then eighth grade is when the whole my dad incident happened. And then by eighth grade, I made the switch. Like I was like, I'm black now. I'm black and I'm back. I'm black now, and I'm black. And I'm blackity black, but black. So yeah, I did that. So I came back and started, and then that's like the whole throwback jersey thing happened. I started, you know, embracing that part of my aspect, right? And I remember I would be in class and I'd be like, talking like slang and stuff, and the teacher would be like, "Why are you talking like that? You don't talk like that." It was like, "How you know how I talk? You don't know how I talk." And it just became a big funny thing. Everybody would, thought it was so funny, right? But I was just trying to find my identity, right? I wasn't necessarily just trying to be funny, but in a sense I was, right? Um so yeah, so I went through middle school and then until junior year of high school in this white ass Alpharetta. Sort of just, like I was just cool with everybody, right? But I was always isolated until, I found my group of friends and we played basketball together, right? And and that was the first time, I didn't feel the pressure of just basketball was like one of the first things like playing it, and where it's more so just about are you good or not, right? I didn't feel the pressure of like, oh, are you too white? Are you too black? What's your identity? It's just, are you good or not? And then that is why that group of friends was probably like the best group of friends I ever had, right? Because they were diverse, and it was like a white kid, an Asian kid, an African kid, me, an African kid too. And we just hung out every day after school and played basketball. And I think that, that really made me more comfortable with myself. And like, they were funny as hell, right? So it helped my sense of humor too be more like, middle of the road. But anyway, so my experience with the race up to that point was just like, identity. It was all about finding who you are. And my identity I associated with what I thought was cool and what I thought I wanted to be like and what I wanted to project, the energy I want to project, right? Because it's just, I had always been so not confident, right? And with hip hop and and embracing my blackness, I found like a more confident streak, right? Even though, and then so all that happened. Once again, I moved, and then I went from Alpharetta to Chambly. Chambly is a sort of a more diverse community, but it's still pretty white and Asian. But the school at Chambly High School is like a school where they bus in like kids from the east side of town, and Alpharetta did this too as well. But I was often ostracized by those kids, right? Because they were like, cause I don't know, people just, I guess everybody thought I was like fake or something. Like black kids thought I was fake, white kids thought I was weird and funny or just funny. So I was ostracized by them. But when I went to Chambly for my senior year of high school, it was like a chance to start new, right? Because these kids didn't know me, and I was fully ingrained in culture of the African American culture. It's so funny, like the whole term of like African American, black, all these terms, like they mean so much, but they actually have very little meaning, right? Because there's no black nation, no black language, and no black culture, right? But that's what we identify with, and that's an issue, right? Because when your identity is something that is so porous, it's easy for it to be broken, or it's easy for people to tell you what your identity is supposed to be. Well, at any rate, I went to Chambly, started brand new, and that was like the first time walking into Chambly. So Chambly was a charter school, and it was actually a very segregated school. There was like a black hallway, and then there was like a white hallway that would also have like the more well-to-do black kids on it. And I just remember the first time I walked into school, I had like these long little flip braids, and I had my baggy ass clothes, super matched up. I mean, I dressed really well. Like I had like everything was matching and everything was like pretty cool. I had the nice Air Forces and every color. I think I was wearing Carolina blue that day, so I had my Carolina Jordans on. And that was the first time I had ever walked into a place. And been admired, right? Because I immediately saw like everybody was looking at me like, who is this kid? Like, oh my God. Like all the girls were like, oh, this kid that's a cute looking guy. And then the dudes were just, looking at me too, because dudes just thought you'd be like, who the hell is this guy? Who's this different looking motherfucker coming into our school? So that was an interesting experience. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged to something, right? But then at the same time, that's when I started sort of like, it didn't start, it was like immediate, like I didn't know, I was sort of questioning my authenticity, right? Because all these kids were from that element, and I was just like admiring that element. Obviously, like I said, my family is, from black communities as well, and I've been in black communities and I've been around, but I've never like been immersed in a black community. So I was a little uncertain about my role, or if I was authentic enough, right? So I just kept it low key. I remember the first day I came to school, I was high as fuck. And that was not a good idea. I don't know why I decided to get high as fuck for the first time I ever came to meet all these new people. So I was just hella quiet. Just very, very quiet. And I didn't say much. And when I did, it would be like, hey, blah, 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 blah. I would like try to like, hood it up a little bit, the way I talk, just, to fit in, because I wanted to fit in. And it's funny because I remember at the time I was driving, my mom had given me, uh, she had this older 740 BMW, and she had moved to Florida, right? So she had given me that car, and that was sort of my drive around car. And but I remember thinking, it's like, I don't want people to see me driving a BMW, man. I don't want people to think I have money. Um, or came from money, which I don't, and that's funny. The funny part is I don't come from money, but I did come from Alpharetta. And and even more ironic, there's a lot of kids at Chamblee who are a lot more well off than I ever was, right? Like a lot of kids who lived in Stone Mountain and and all these places, and they drove nicer cars than I ever could imagine, even today. Um, but yeah, so it was all this perception thing. I didn't want people to perceive me as a kid that had something, right? I just wanted to be on an even plane with everybody. So I gave that car to my uncle, and then I actually didn't have a car, which was funny. So that immediately, which was a dumb move because I think that limited my social reaction. There was like so many I remember girls were just so more aggressive, right? They like were aggressive in like pursuing me and wanting to initiate like us hanging out. But I mean, I was living with my grandma and my dad, so we never really did anything. I was just staying at home. Like that was a point when the isolation didn't have to happen, but it did. And so I just I got to know these people more, and I just thought they were cool as hell, right? So I became more and more like them, right? And that kept going. I remember there was like a lot of stuff. Like I think the Sean Bell incident first happened when I was a senior in high school, and that was the first time I really saw like a divide, even between like black kids, where like, oh, I'm not protesting for that, blah blah blah. But we were holding the protest, and and we were going outside, but some people just didn't want to go. It didn't last long or anything. It wasn't that powerful, but it was definitely one of the first large scale incidents, that Sean Bell incident, that really put in perspective, like, damn, a black life isn't really worth much in America, right? Um, but yeah, so my whole perception of race was just like, uh fitting in, right? It's always just about fitting in, man. You don't want to rock the boat too much. You don't want to be too different. You just don't embrace, I didn't at least embrace being different that much when I was younger, even though I was always hella different. Like I was the same mind. When I'd go home and I'd be alone, I'd still think of all the same, you know, weird things that I always did, right? But when I was around people, um, that was my I was just a normal kid, man, just a normal black kid who thought the same shit and wanted to do the same shit and wanted to smoke and drink and get into fuck shit. So that continued into college. And it wasn't until like just in terms of it wasn't until like for either freshman or sophomore year of college, when I was working at Hot Beats, right, there was this girl named Courtney that I really liked. She was awesome, like very nurturing and caring. She was a Taurus. She actually had the same exact birthday as my grandma. She was so nurturing and caring. And one day I was on campus, and I was rocking this big ass Atlanta jacket, this brown Atlanta. It was fire though. It was like these big ass jeans, this big ass shirt. And then I remember seeing her, and she said something like, "Damn, you look like a real Atlanta nigga right now." And I remember after that day, it triggered me. It's like, damn, if this girl who I really fuck with is looking at me just like a nigga, I really need to switch it up, right? So that after that day, I really stopped. I put an emphasis on really stop dressing like with the baggy clothes, right? And just looking like such a stereotype, right? But but I was still, still all in the hip hop and still all that, so I still, wanted that. acceptance from the Black community, right? That I never really had, right? So, but I did stop wearing the baggy clothes anyway, because I just thought, your image means a lot. That's the first time I really considered that the things that I like could be perceived negatively by other people, right? Um, so I stopped that. Um, and I started slowly but surely coming back to who I was as a person, right? And realizing that being Black is not a homogenous thing, right? It's not, being Black is just like being anything else. You just got to get what you want to get done. It's more about your personal aspirations and dreams than any group think, right? So yes, so I still have my friends and I still did all that, but slowly but surely as we went through college and went on, I was still at Hot Beats, but a lot of these friends that I had at Chambly, either they moved away or some of them, were, just wanting to use me for studio time and, not really wanting to hang out, but just like hitting me up to come through to the studio. That's not all of them, like, but some of them, so a lot of those friends, we sort of drifted apart, right? And then when I started pursuing rock music, the drift was even bigger because these people that I really had enjoyed like making music with for all that time, we started drifting apart because our interests were different, right? Which was always the case in a lot of different aspects for my whole life, right? My interests were different, but I compromised my interests, to be around, to have more friends, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing because you do need friends and you're not always going to like all the same things that your friends do. But as I got older, I decided that it wasn't as important to me to compromise what I liked, right? So yeah, I started gravitating towards more music, towards rock music, and I guess doing things that people might perceive more white. So that turned off a lot of the people that fuck with me. So that put me further by myself, right? So that pretty much is just to give you a backstory of my personal experience with race, right? Um, so now I want to talk more about what's more pertinent to what's going on, right? Like being Black in America, police brutality, and even how a person like me who sort of looks at the whole thing differently, right? Like I said, I didn't come up immersed in any Black environment um, until later, right? Um, so police brutality. Let's talk about police. I know. Well, first I can talk about some racist moments, right? So there's been a lot of racist moments in my life. I can think of a couple. The first being in this one didn't happen to me, but I remember one time when in Marietta, my sister's friend Courtney, not the same as the other Courtney. She said that one time she was in a shopping center and guys in some van or something with like KKK hood started surrounding her and threatening her, and she had to she got out safe and everything, but always remember her saying that. um I also remember that in middle school there was a kid, a kid. It was funny because he was actually one of the first kids I was friendly with, right? But he would always like drop the N word. It was like this white kid. I guess he thought it was funny or something like that, right? I mean, I never like beat him up or anything, but I always remembered that shit. It's like, damn, bro, damn, white people, man. A lot of times they don't necessarily understand um, what it means to be offensive, right? Or the context of their offense, right? Um, but eventually that kid, I just didn't fuck with him anymore. But you know what I mean? But I still to this day don't even really think he understood how offensive that was. But me personally, I never really get offended by words, right? You can say whatever the fuck you want, and I don't give a shit. You're not gonna control my uh my emotional being by using words. Like, you know, criticism is more hurtful to me, right? Like criticism or someone telling you're incompetent, but someone just calling you a name, I mean, that doesn't mean anything to me. You cannot get a reaction out of me by calling me a nigger or something like that. That's just, I don't give a shit. Or a beaner or a spick or whatever. All these words that could apply to me in a derogatory form, they mean nothing to me, right? Because words have absolutely no power um, on an emotional or mental, intellectual level. Like it just means nothing, right? Um, so anyway, my perspective, well, not my perspective, but so the racial moments. And then I remember one time when I was driving up to go see my girl up in Kennesaw, I was on the highway, and like this group of like white people in this shitty pickup truck, they were just looking at me and they look like demons, and they were just screaming out the window, screaming at me as I was driving down the highway. That was a little startling, and that was definitely a racist moment as well. Um, but other than that, it's always just been things like people, you know, a white woman sees you coming and she clutches her purse, or you know what I mean? I don't remember ever really being followed in a store or anything like that. But you just know, like you feel it. Like you feel race. You feel racial tension, right? Because a person doesn't necessarily have to say anything for you to feel their uncertainty about you, or for them to uh you know, it's like you don't have to speak to feel fear, right? And that's what they do. They fear uh the color. They fear what might happen, you know, if black people are around. Or they fear because they don't understand, right? Because they see all these images that the media portrays and controls about the black diaspora, and then that's what they believe, right? Especially when they're not exposed at a high level or a consistent level to black people, right? So you feel that. Um, so yeah, like racial tension has always been felt, and it's always been like you always get it in that, like, oh, you speak so well, right? And that's like the stereotypical, like everybody always, you know, black people who don't necessarily or who bring their good voice, right? That's what they hear. Or you know, or the whole let me touch your hair thing. There's a lot of micro things, like micro racism, I guess you could call it, that isn't necessarily, you know, like bigotry, but it's still racism. And just on that, like on the whole definition of racism, I think, you know, America is a racist place, right? It's a racist country because when you say racist, I think, to me, what that means is that you base your decisions, you base your ideals, and you base the information that you interpret on race, right? Or some aspect of you know, the color of people's skin, right? Whether or not, you know what I mean? Because people can be prejudiced, right? Prejudice is just prejudgment. That means you prejudge somebody. But just because you're prejudiced doesn't mean you're a bigot. I feel like when you're a bigot, that means when you act on your prejudice, you know. But racism is a system, right? If this whole country is based on acknowledging skin color, so this whole country is racist, right? Um, I think, and a lot of times you have to get rid of like the negative component of things, right? Just don't think of things as positive and negative, right? Just think of things as what they are, right? And racism is a system, right? And it's a system that is based um, on noticing noticing the differences between colors, right? Um, so that's just like my perspective of, you know, just race. So yeah, America is a racist place, right? And like these people do these things, they're racially motivated, but they're not necessarily hateful. So they're not bigots, but they're racist, right? Um, they're not bigots, but they're prejudiced, right? But everybody's prejudiced, right? Everybody walks into a room and they assess a situation and they judge it. They prejudge it. Whether they act on those judgments or not is a different thing, right? But you walk into a place, just like anybody who's walking down the street at night, you know, and you see a person coming towards you, you know what I mean? Your first thing to assess is this person a threat or not, right? And whether that person's black, white, yellow, brown, whatever. If they look wily, if they're walking with the hoodie on and they look wily and they look a little unkempt, maybe they're just drunk, right? But you're in your mind, you're gonna be okay. I need to be on high guard while I'm passing this person, right? Or another person might just be like, oh, let me go the other side of the street, or another person be like, oh, let me find another way to go so I don't even have to interact with this person because I don't know. My prejudgment tells me that this could potentially be an unpleasant situation, right? So that's just to lay a basis of what those words: racism, prejudice, and bigotry. Bigotry to me is like when you act on racism. And a lot of people say like, oh, well, you have to have power to be racist. I don't necessarily think that's true, right? Because racism is the system. Just like you have to have laws for a democracy, right? That was a bad example. I don't know where I was going with that. Right, but yeah, you don't necessarily have to have power to be racist. I think you have to benefit from racism, you have to have power, right? So it doesn't really make sense for black people to be racist, right? Because we get the short end of the stick, right? This system is not built to benefit bigotry against white people, right? And it's not, and the prejudgment that people make is usually not for black people, right? Because we have a stigma about being the more dangerous, the more mysterious, the more volatile group, which isn't true at all, right? Because there's a lot of diversity in every situation, right? And I'm sure the percentages of every group that are bad, good, or in the middle are about the same, right? Because that's just how people are. The law of averages always works. But in this country, when we are the smallest percent, and the media paints us in such a polarizing light, right? There's no room. Even black people are prejudiced against black people, right? There's no room. The prejudice, just like it's always funny to me when like Jewish people are like, oh, that's racist, or that's to say that Jewish people control all the money. Well, even if that's not true, right? That's a lot better of a stereotype than a black person being shiftless and lazy and wanting public assistance, or all these little things that they attach to black people, right? Being a person in charge of all the money is a lot better than that, right? So like I said, the whole system is sort of based on thinking about black people in a negative light. And then it also has to do with the whole white and black dichotomy, right? Because as long as there's white, there's black, and white is the positive, black is the negative, right? So people subconsciously are programmed to fear black because darkness is scary, right? And black is the minority, but in reality, black is the majority. If you look into the sky, is the whole world not surrounded in blackness? I'm getting a little metaphysical here, but I'm just trying to let you into my mind and the way that I sort of think about race, right? But anyway, so in terms of police brutality, I want to just share a couple incidences that I had with police, right? The bad ones, and then I'll give you some good ones. So on 4 separate occasions with police, I've had guns drawn on me by multiple police, right? So I don't know if I'm giving it to you correctly chronologically, but I'll try my best. So the first one was one time I had just got my hair braided and I was coming home. The hair braiding lady dropped me off, Annette. She dropped me off, and I was just walking into my complex. And all of a sudden, a cop pulled up. He jumped out of his car, and he put his hand on his holster, and he was like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Oh, I live here." He's like, "Oh, you live here? Let me see your neighborhood ID." And I was like, this place doesn't have neighborhood IDs. And mind you, this is like in Brookhaven. This is like a pretty well-to-do urban part of Atlanta, right? Then, you know, that diffused pretty quickly. And he was like, oh, well, okay, well, whatever, blah, blah, blah. You know, blah, blah, blah. Just next time you're, I forget what he even said. It didn't make any sense. Like, there's nothing I could have done differently in that situation. The next time was when I was at, let me think of this. Okay, the next time when I was at a frat party at Georgia Tech, right? One of my friends was pledging with Georgia Tech, and I had just so happened to lock my keys in the car, right? So I was ready to leave. It was probably like 11 o'clock or something like that, maybe a little later. And I was ready to leave. We'd been smoking weed. We'd been, you know, doing that. So I had a little weed on me, but I had locked my keys in the car. So it was me, my friend Ike, and I think Sean. It was three of us. And we were just sort of standing out there. And I was trying to get in my car. I was actually waiting. I think I called AAA or something like that. And we were just sort of waiting. And then all of a sudden, like 6 or 7 cop cars pulled up and they surrounded us. And they all jumped out, pulled out their guns, and they were aiming at us. And I was like, oh my God, what is going on? So when I saw the cops coming, I threw the weed into the bush, right? So that wasn't an issue. But they all came up to us and they had their guns out. And I quickly was just like, yo, I locked my keys in my car, just waiting for AAA. They were like, oh. And then one black cop came up to me and he was like, oh, yeah, sorry, man, this happens here all the time. You know, you got to be careful around these parts, you know. These white kids are quick to call in a black person that they don't know or some shit like that. And then, so whatever. And then the next time was, I had a job. So it was a job interview. It wasn't a job interview. I had got the job. I was working for AT&T. And they had like a little, like in the little industrial part of Norcross, they had like a little, just a little parking lot. And I got to the job early. It was like, you know, maybe 12 o'clock. We were supposed to get there at maybe 12:30 or something. I was just sitting in the parking lot early. Obviously, just to let y'all know, I had braids during all these, if that really makes a difference, right? So I was just sitting in the parking lot. I had my button up. I was dressed real nice. Like I dressed like I was ready to go to work. And once again, I'm just sitting there. And then I look down, I look up, and the next thing I know, there's like 8 cop cars around me. And then they all jump out, guns drawn. And I'm like, oh my God, what the hell? So I like put my hands up. I'm like, I don't remember if I put them on the steering wheel, if I put them up. And then they came to my window. My window was already down because my AC didn't work. So they came up and they were like, oh, blah, blah, blah. What are you doing here? And I'm like, oh, I got a job. I like work. I'm just early for work. I'm working right over there. And they're like, and they call it in, blah, blah, blah. And then once again, I forget if it might have been a white cop. It was a black. I forget if it was a black cop or a white cop who came up to me and he said, oh, yeah. He said literally the same thing that the cop at Georgia Tech had said. It's like, oh, yeah, this happens all the time. People around here are real, what's the word? Real suspicious or real quick to call the cops on, black people. So pretty much both times the cops had just excused the racism of people and be like, oh, like this happens all the time. It's all good. It's like, well, y'all could have killed me, man. Then there's one more bad incident. I remember one time I was at Georgia State. I was coming home from school, and I jumped on the bus on the MARTA train. I was just saying, like, I'm a singing ass nigga, man. I walk around singing, not too loud, just like sort of level. I'm not screaming. I'm not trying to, but I like singing, man. It makes me feel good. It raises my dopamine, especially after a long shitty day at Georgia State. So I was on the train. And I was just singing, and then suddenly this cop, like I remember, I could see like when I was walking, it was at Peachtree Station. I was walking down. I could see he was sort of like looking at me and sort of following me. So, and I was sort of conscious of that, right? So I quieted down a little bit, and then I just moved and went further down the platform. Then the train came, and I got on the train. And And the next thing I know, like I'm just singing lightly again. I see this dude like making his way through the carts. Like he's coming through. There's a black cop, by the way. He's like 6'5", yoked, looks like a football player. So I'm walking through, he's coming through, and then like he comes up to me. He waits till it stops at I think it was Midtown Station or something like that, or Civic Center. It was empty as hell and dark. This dude like grabbed me up by my shirt, yoked me off the train, and he was like, when I tell you to stop singing or whatever he said, when I tell you to, like, you don't need to be singing out here, you disturbing people, blah blah blah, and just did all that just to tell me that and yoked me off the train. And I had to wait another 20 minutes for the next train, and this fool just walked away. And all that to say is like that stuff, there's a lot of PTSD that I don't even really consider that goes on, being black in America and dealing with cops, right? It's like you can't even really just like do normal things a lot of times without, police coming down on you and drawing guns. And like I was seconds away from dying several times. You know what I mean? That cop on that one empty train station, he could have done whatever, right? And no one would have known, no one would have taken my word, right? But, we just sort of, take it and just keep on living. And, you know what I mean? Like I said, I never really thought of it or internalized it, Another time, I remember I was driving with my girl, and I didn't have my seatbelt on, right? And I saw a cop pass me. He was going that way. And I sort of saw him look at me. He looked at me and he did like this, like a little seatbelt thing. And so I was driving a little bit down. Then I was at a connector. And suddenly I see a cop come around, and a cop literally stops and pulls me over. And he gets out the car and he's like, hey, give me your keys. He's like, give me your keys. Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what? He's like, take your keys out of the ignition. Give me your keys. Then so he takes the keys and he goes back to his car. After like 10 minutes, he finally comes back and he's like, oh yeah, we had got a report of someone who just stole a car, and it fit your description. It was just like this car, but it's not you, blah, blah, blah. So he gave him back the keys. But then I'm like, that's not even true, because I literally just saw you signal to me that this was a black cop, by the way. I just saw you signal to me that I didn't have my seatbelt on. So he obviously pulled me over because I didn't have my seatbelt on, but I had put it on by then. So I guess he was just trying to make up something, right? Because maybe he thought he was going to catch me slipping, but he was trying to like teach me a lesson. So he literally just made up something, took my keys, put me and my girl in like fear, made us late to wherever we were going. And anyway, but yeah, it's just the negative stuff. So I just want people to know there's a lot of PTSD that goes on with black people when it comes to dealing with cops. And I mean, I'm sure there's some out here who'd be like, oh, I've never experienced racism, like Lil Wayne or something like that. But I think that's real ridiculous. And I think that even if you haven't experienced implicit racism or just straightforward racism, that, it's been there, right? It's always there. It's always there. And you just sort of have to think. And I think maybe talking to the right person or sitting down, you'll probably realize, oh, damn, I did sort of face that, right? Well, anyway, so some of the positive, just to give you some positive experiences, because they haven't all been bad. And all the positive experiences all had to do with weed, with me like hotboxing my car and getting pulled over. I think I can think of 3 off the top of my head occasions when my car reeked of weed, maybe 4 actually. No, it was 3. And the cops just let me go, right? The first time, it was over in Gwinnett. I was driving, and then it was a lady cop. I think she was black or maybe Spanish or something. She was like, she ran through the whole gambit, and then my car reeked, right? I just smoked in the car. I don't know why I smoked in the car so much, but so she went and she took my license, came back, blah, blah, blah. It ended up, I was like doing 5 over in a 35. It's like a speed trap on Beaufort Highway where they just suddenly dropped the speed. And she was like, and when she came back, she was like, is there anything else I should know? And I was like, nope. And she just sort of like shook her head and gave me my license and let me go. That was actually the second time. The first time was in Stone Mountain. It was a black cop, and I just finished smoking some banana kush with my homie Don, and I dropped him off, and I was on the way back, and I was testing out my auto, what's it called? Where it controls the speed when you drive, whatever. And I was just testing that out. So I guess I was going a little fast, and the cop pulled me over. He smelled the weed. Um, I actually didn't have like my insurance or anything on me. I was all fucked up. And then so it was like a 30-minute ordeal. Like he'd come to the car, I'd give him some shit that I thought was the insurance. It wasn't. And he'd come back, I give him some shit that he thought was the insurance. So finally, on the last time, he came back and he was like, "Listen, man, you seem like a good kid, blah, blah, blah." He's like, "Are you in school?" I was like, yeah, I'm in school. And he was like, "Yo," he's like, "What would your parents think if they knew that you were driving around high right now, blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "Oh man, they would be so upset, blah, blah, blah." And he was like, "Well, you know what? I'm just going to give you this ticket and I'm going to let you go. But you need to take your ass home and never be out here again." I also didn't have any weed on me either, so there's nothing they really could have done. But he didn't even bother searching or doing anything like that. He just sort of let me go. And then the other time, which was the most shocking, I was up in like Beaufort, Georgia, and like this white cop with a buzz haircut pulled me over. I actually had weed on me and everything. My car stunk, all that. He didn't even mention it. Man, and that was because of a headlight. I like had a headlight out or something like that. He just gave me a warning and let me go. I was like, "Oh shit, okay." He had to have smelled that shit. Yeah, man. So there's another one I don't want to mention that could incriminate me, but just for making bad decisions. I mean, one time I had, maybe a couple more drinks than I should have, and I was driving, and this cop, sort of let me go because I guess he thought I told he must not have smelled anything on my breath, but then I was like, "Oh, I have this gig job," and he just sort of let me go. But that was I shouldn't have been doing that. But I wasn't that drunk. But so you think if you have like two, 3 beers and you get pulled over and be like, "Oh, that's probably enough to get a DUI," right? Even though I was okay to drive. But at any rate, yeah, man. So I just want to say that to highlight some of the PTSD that Black people go through when it comes to dealing with cops. And and as we move on, this whole like I said, it's a shame, Breonna Taylor, the whole thing, how the cops were, acquitted on the same day as the Emmett Till thing. That I think what we got to realize is at this point as Black people, they're mocking us. It's just they're mocking us. It's a mockery. That was obviously intentional. They waited that long. Just like the George Floyd thing, them being on his neck that long was intentional. Like they picked that time for a reason, right? And I don't want to get into all that right now, but you can do research. And a lot of this stuff that the media uses. So on average, they say about 2 unarmed Black men get shot a week by police, but only certain ones get highlighted, right? And that's for a reason. That's because the media wants to control the way you think, the way you perceive, the way you deal with trauma, right? And it's all a distraction and a division tactic, right? And it's all a mockery, right? They're never going to, first of all, people don't know what to ask for, right? And so a lot of people within the Black community are divided because it's so hard to get on one accord about what it is that we want, or what it is that would make this better. Because at the end of the day, the onus is in their court, right? You can't end racism until white people acknowledge it. And white people don't acknowledge that this is a racist country, right? So it's all just pomp and pageantry. It's all just a mockery, right? Every gesture that they do, just like Malcolm X said, I don't know the exact quote, but he's like, they'll give you symbols instead of actual action, right? Or they'll give you symbols instead of change. And that's what they continually do. Like the NBA putting Black Lives Matter on their court, having all these multi-million-dollar athletes come out and talk like they give a shit about what we think or what we're going through. They do on a certain level, but at the end of the day, if they really wanted to help, they could, put more things together. And maybe they do, but be more public about it, right? So that it encourages more people to give, right? And it's like Black Lives Matter. Like I remember when all this stuff first went down, didn't they get like $500 million? What did they do with that money? Like I know plenty of Black people still struggling, man, who could use like $10,000, and they got $500 million sitting in some bank account somewhere, making somebody rich. It didn't come to us, right? Or at least we didn't hear about it, you know. So I think that it's just this whole black and white dichotomy is just a distraction tactic. And at the end of the day, like police are going to do what they do, right? They're going to be brutal. They're going to be out here. And if you decide, and if a white person bucks against the police, he probably won't get killed. If a black person does, he probably will, right? And that is just a component of being Black people in captivity, right? That is a component of racist America, right? And it is okay to speak up against that, right? But don't get too tied to not getting the change you want when you're in their country, right? When you're in captivity in their country, right? And this is a white rulership, right? So they'll give you symbols, but they're not going to give you change, right? So what you have to do is the change that you request might have to be more subversive, right? It might have to be other things. But all in all, my opinion of all this is like, who gives a fuck what white people think about you, right? Who gives a fuck if white people think you're this or think you're that? Like, their perceptions should not affect, and they do, right? Because it's a system thing, right? Systematically, it'll always affect you, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't overcome, right? So it's harder. It is, right? Because we're the captive people of this white rulership, that who knows how much longer this white rulership will last, right? But as long as we're here, we have to, keep our own stride. We can't ask for their freedom. There is no such thing as equality. No single person wants equality. Every person wants to be better than the next person in some way or another. Maybe not in all aspects, right? But in some way or another, every person looks at the other person, whether it's to inspire them or whether it creates envy, whatever chemical reaction it creates inside you. No one wants to be equal, right? So with that in mind, we don't need a hug from the white man. We don't need, they know what they do wrong, and them acknowledging it's not helping anything, right? Them pretending, putting up statues or tearing down statues or getting rid of flags, it doesn't do anything. Maybe in 100 years when those symbols of hate are gone and stuff, and they don't, in the subconscious element is repealed, maybe it'll make a difference. But in the now, what we got to realize is that it doesn't matter what they think about you. It really doesn't. You have to push on, knowing, just like if there's black ice outside, not to speed, right? So in a racist world, you have to act accordingly to, get your way. You know what I mean? You have to be psychologically adept to get your way from these people who want to oppress you, right? You know what I mean? And it is unfair, right? But a lot of things are unfair. The fact that we all have to slave day to day to get meager pay just to sustain a life that makes us unhappy, that's unfair, isn't it? Right? So just know, in this white rulership, it was not created to be equal. And equality is a myth, right? All that to say is, like, keep fighting the good fight in terms of bettering yourself. You know what I mean? Don't get too emotionally tied into these narratives that they try to sell you, in terms of what you should be mad about or what you shouldn't be mad about. Or if you don't support this, you're a coon. Or if you do support this, you're a terrorist or whatever it might. It's just so extreme, right? There's no middle ground, right? It's just like, and everybody, it just creates division and destruction and distraction amongst everybody who partakes in it, right? So your best bet is to tune out of all the negativity that surrounds what the media perpetuates in this country. You know what I mean? Self-sustain. I mean, it might sound crazy, but learn how to grow your own food. Learn how to make your own money, even if it's not a lot, right? Just like with the NBA players, when Kyrie posed the whole thing about, oh, we should start our own league, and everybody balked at him, and almost implying that black people aren't capable of doing the work that it would take to start a league. But the reality is that a lot of these dudes get paid inordinate amounts of money. And if they were to start their own league, they would all have to take a pay cut. You know what I mean? And they would profit share. And in the long run, they could be just as profitable. But people are not willing to go through discomfort to get where they want to be, right? People want handouts in a sense. People want, they want some type of way that will ensure something, right? But nothing is insured, right? Nothing in life is insured, right? They can give you money, right? Someone dies, they can give you money. Your house blows up, they can give you money, but everything that's inside that house is lost, right? And it can't come back, right? Those atoms have been separated. Right. So what was I even saying? Insured. Nothing's insured. What kind of point was I trying to make here? Nothing is insured. Your house, if your house is gone, blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm just saying, self-sustaining is important. Oh, yeah. The point was that, okay, so like sometimes you have to take steps back to take steps forward, right? You know what I mean? So, yeah, I applaud everybody who goes out here and protests and demands stuff from white people. But to me, those white people aren't ever going to give you what you want. You know what I mean? And maybe for some people that's just validation. Maybe that's just a hug. Maybe that's just some tears. Maybe you want to see white tears. I don't know what it is that you want, but we have to get out of this whole black and white thing, because as long as they're white and we're black, we're a part of the same thing. And the same thing is the racist system that this country was built upon, right? So if you can get rid of the mentality of thinking that you're a part of this, right? Or wanting to be a part of this, or wanting, equality extended to you by your oppressor, right? That's not going to happen. You know what I mean? They'll give you something that looks like equality, that smells like equality. But all in all, if you really break down the semantics, you're never equal. So you're never going to be satisfied with what they give you. So you have to get for yourself in a way. You know what I mean? You have to create your own parameters and break down those walls that make you feel less than in this context of America, right? You know what I mean? You cannot let black define you, because black is within the construct of black and white, right? So do what you can, man. Learn who you are. Maybe take a DNA test, whatever you can do to learn who you are, personally, and help your family, right? You know what I mean? There is no, it's an empty fight to just, it's an empty fight, and it's almost fantastical, and it brings people together, right? And it creates leaders in a sense. But when you're fighting the black and white battle, it's a never ending, unwinnable battle, right? You know what I mean? Fight the gray battle. Somewhere in the middle, right? Where it's like you can take components of each and make them work in your favor, right? You know what I mean? Don't let the media control your mind. Don't let them control your brainwaves, right? Don't let them enrage you. Don't let them influence you. Don't let these millionaire pop stars who, you know, wake up and only care about themselves. Some don't even care about their own family. Don't let them guilt you into thinking that you don't care enough, right? Who are they? Why are they given the platform, right? You have to think of these things like why are they given this platform to sort of parrot what everybody else is saying, right? They don't say anything original. They don't have, and if they do, those sort of comments don't really get, highlighted. You know what I mean? So just think for yourself, man. Don't be afraid to think for yourself. Don't be afraid to look at every situation and judge it accordingly. You don't have to fall in line. No matter what cause it is, right? And me saying that too is to say that, and even if that leads you to, to that could lead you anywhere, man. There's no right and there's no wrong. People aren't wrong for fighting against, fighting in the black and white war. People aren't wrong for that. But at the same time, just think as unemotionally as possible where that's going to get you, right? And consider it, and consider if it's worth it, or if it's fruitful, or if your time might be spent better fighting for other things, or fighting for yourself, or fighting for your health, or fighting for your knowledge, or fighting for information, or fighting for property, or fighting for whatever it might be. You know what I mean? Don't fight for equality, because it's not real. It's not a real thing. Never will be. It never was. You know what I mean? Globalism, is a tool to homogenize thought, right? And if everybody is on one accord, right, then anybody who thinks differently becomes the enemy, right? But people who think differently are the seeds that create the fruit that sustain, that sustain our culture. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm saying. Don't ever be afraid to be an individual. You know what I mean? Don't ever, you know what I mean? But at the same time, if you're an individual to the point where you're an extremist, sometimes keep those opinions to yourself, because people are just going to ostracize you, and a lot of times things are loaded like that, where a person might have a good opinion, but then they have some ludicrous take, and then that alone will invalidate that person with the good opinion. You know what I mean? So you can be extreme, but keep those to yourself. Just be psychologically adept. And if you want things to go your way, there's always a way to do it. You know what I mean? There's always going to be negative situations that occur in every aspect of everything, right? Somebody's just going to be minding their own business, and the police is going to come pick on them, right? And maybe kill them, right? And that's sad. It's terrible. But if you walk with a purpose, you move with a purpose, you don't meander, you don't linger, you have just purpose in every action that you have, you can avoid a lot of the foolishness that goes on in this world. And I think I will leave it at that. So, good day, episode 3. On the musician, that's a the musician, the INFJ musician, that's a Libra and stuff podcast. All right, thanks guys. Bye.